She was one of the most memorable, fearless, and gifted singers of a generation. Sinead O'Connor is dead at the age of 56, but her impact will continue on in her music. Today, we unpack the life and legacy of the incomparable Irish musician.
It's been 7 hours and 15 days since you took your love away.
I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Yesterday, we heard the news that Sinead O'Connor has died. She's best known for the track you're hearing right now, that unforgettable 1990 cover of the Prince song, Nothing Compares to You. No one could break your heart quite like Sinead O'Connor and then put it back together. I've honestly lost track of how many times I've cried along to this song, as I'm sure many of you have as well. It's truly one of the greatest vocal performances in pop music history. But she was so much more than just that one song. Sinead was a brave, fearless, and frankly just cool artist with a vast and eclectic body of work and a reputation as one of the most outspoken artists of her generation. To look back on all that she's left us, we've got music journalist Niko Stratis, Maura Johnston, and Irish author Anakana Schofield. Anakana, I want to start with you. What went through your mind when you heard this tragic news yesterday?
Well, very unusually, I was actually sitting in St. James Cathedral. I had gone in there totally on a whim, and I was sitting there, and I wouldn't say I was saying a prayer, I would say I was saying a personal muttering, because I was feeling some personal anguish at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there, and then I got a text from somebody I'd just been to lunch with that said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. Sinead O'Connor died while we were at lunch." And I looked up and I was surrounded by the pipe organ, the Virgin Mary, and a number of other people that were quietly praying. And I just had this moment where, of course, I was just like, well, this is very apt to be right here in a space. And also there was a pride flag on the wall of the cathedral. So it felt like the perfect place to hear this news. And then, of course, I was absolutely devastated and walked around and, and then I walked out into the street. I walked up Church Street where there were lots of churches, and I listened to This Is the Last Day of Our Acquaintance. And I was just surrounded by construction and some people without homes who were showing clear signs of mental distress. And then I went home and wailed and cried all night, basically.
I mean, this whole story is just giving me chills. And I want to play a little bit of that song because Niko and I were talking about it yesterday, how powerful this song is.
This is the last day of our acquaintance. I will meet you later in somebody's office.
I mean, if you want to let someone know that your relationship is over, just say nothing and play that song. Niko, I was really so moved yesterday by all the different tributes online and where they came from. Ice-T, Rob Delaney, Russell Crowe shared this beautiful story. She meant so many different things to so many different people. What did she mean to you?
We talked about this before we started recording about crying and maybe not crying on the air. And as soon as Nothing Compares to You started playing, I felt it. My eyes are red right now just thinking about it. And I think this sort of speaks to it, right? She meant a lot to a lot of people because she was the sort of iconoclastic image that sort of emerged in the early 90s and was this figurehead that meant a lot of different things that we maybe didn't fully understand. But it was also this thing of if you really took the time to explore it and discover who Sinead O'Connor was. I was lucky to grow up with a mother who would tell me about music and would tell me about artists and would encourage me to explore who people were, not just, who I read about in the news or what I heard in their music. And, Sinead O'Connor was one of those people where I heard Nothing Compares to You and I knew about the Saturday Night Live thing. And I was like, well, who is this person? And I discovered her music. And, Last Day of Our Acquaintance, you and I talked yesterday. I was like, I was in the chip aisle in Shoppers Drug Mart crying, listening to that song because she came to mean so much to me over the years. And her music is really beautiful. And I think reading those things, reading Ice-T, reading all these people that had personal experiences there, Michael Stipe and all these people that were sharing their story and their time with her. It is really interesting to see just how many different lives and different people and different communities of people that she reached and that she engaged with and that she mattered to. And it is one of the sad things is sort of understanding how much she meant to so many people after she's gone, and knowing that existed in real time, when she was alive, but not really getting that credit so much as being a topic of conversation more about all the parts of her as opposed to all the ways in which she mattered to people. And that has been a really touching thing to read.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that come up a lot too. Just why didn't we say all these things while she was still here? Maura, Niko mentioned that her mom had played her this music, and that's something I saw a lot yesterday is people saying, my mom played this for me in the car, or, it was the music that connected so many generations. So let's talk about that first album, The Lion and the Cobra. It was released in 1987. She was only 20 years old. Another thing that just blows my mind. How did that album land? Like, what was the reaction to Sinead O'Connor when she first arrives on the scene?
I mean, she cut a very striking, profile. And obviously this was the sort of continuation of the MTV age where artists' images were as important as their songs in some ways, as far as like getting them out there, especially in America, where MTV had become by then the de facto radio station. But I think also her voice was it just cut through in such a impressive way. And she was fearless and she was defiant, and she made music on her own terms. And I think that was what made her stand out so much in that increasingly crowded landscape of what was then called modern rock in the late 80s. She, and obviously her voice could just like slice through even the thickest fog. So I think that it was something that, people in the know, I mean, obviously she had the big pop breakthrough with her next album, but people who were following, say, 120 Minutes or, the things that were sort of geared more toward the modern rock end of the spectrum were taking notice and were really appreciating the fact that she was cutting her own profile in this impressive way.
She really did cut her own profile, and I think that's one of the lasting images of her. I want to play a clip. This is from 2 years after that debut album came out in 1989, just after she'd become famous.
A lot of people have this impression that I'm this great sort of tough woman, just because I happen to say what I think, and, I'm not. And just because I say what I think doesn't mean I am. I'm a nice, sweet little girl, really, I didn't feel by shaving my head that I was making a statement, A lot of other people seem to think that, but I just got fed up with the way I looked. Like I dyed my hair a lot, or I cut it or whatever, and there wasn't much else I could do to it,
Anakana, it's funny to hear her downplay what that meant, what it meant to shave her head. Why did she matter so much for you and other Irish women at that time?
Well, it's really important to understand the context of Ireland at that time. First of all, we grew up with Sinead. I'm very close in age to Sinead. And yesterday, a friend of mine said, I adored her all my life. So, she was so critical to us because, she... First of all, music was a male domain, largely. She was like one of the first women. And the other thing that I think was really important about Sinead was the way in which her physicality, when she took to the stage, she was in her body. She's very muscular. Her voice was very muscular. She demanded public reckoning on very difficult and violent truths. And in a way, we didn't have that kind of space in Ireland in the 80s and the 90s, so she gave us enormous courage. I mean, I'm a novelist. There's no way I could have written, especially my second book, Martin John, without the influence of Sinead O'Connor. No question. She comes out of a time where if you spoke up about things, nobody would have believed you. I mean, this was an oppressive, very patriarchal, the culture that was living under basically the iron fist of the church. And, the female body was enemy number 1 or 2, probably 1. So that context is very important.
Yeah, there's so many great quotes I've seen just in reading pieces about what she had to say about Ireland in that time and what it felt like to live under that heavy sort of cloud. So Niko, in 1990, she goes from this exciting young alt-rock singer and boom, she's a bona fide pop star with Nothing Compares to You. And that shaved head, that teardrop just falling so gently and gracefully, that close-up, it was just something that once you saw it, you could not forget it. Why was that combination, that voice, that song, that magic that occurred with that video, why was it so powerful?
Because we hadn't really seen anything like it. Sinead O'Connor was really one of a kind in so many different ways. And, like for me, like I'm of an age, I'm in my early 40s and, like when I was sort of starting to engage with music, this is what I'm like, I'm quite young, I'm a child. And it's so striking to see this like beautiful woman with this shaved head who doesn't look like, so much of what we're sold as pop music at the time. She doesn't fit that bill. And then you hear that voice, this voice that, like you said, it cuts through the fog. It's tender and it's soft, but it's capable of so much power and might. And it's always holding itself back. And there's all these things happening at one time. And it envelops you in this way that just not a lot of other stuff did. It reminds me a lot of the way that I heard when I first heard Fast Car, when you get this feeling of like, this is going to change my life forever. There's stuff I love that I know will never change my life, but Nothing Compares to You. The first time you hear that, it's like, oh, this is going to haunt me. Like that image of Sinead O'Connor, I can if you just say her name, it comes to my mind. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And I think it's because it just stood in such stark contrast to everything else that we were seeing at the time. And it was this thing where she was like, this is who I am. And it was very honest and very earnest. And it was never put on. She was never doing it to further her career or to look like anybody else. She was very staunchly trying to be herself.
She was,
I think,
yes, Maura, no, go ahead.
I think you can also point out how sonically striking Nothing Compares to You was, especially in the context of the time. And I think this is true about Fast Car as well. It's very, pop music in the late 80s, early 90s was very full of stuff because everyone was like, we have all these synthesizers and studio tricks and we have to put them on every song, and it was the age of big guitar solos. And this song, the pyrotechnics came obviously from Sinead's voice, but both of those songs, Fast Car and Nothing Compares to You, were also these just spaces where you could really focus on what this singer was communicating. And I think that that's a very powerful thing to communicate. It's, and it can really reach a lot of people in a very special way in a very quick fashion.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for adding that, Maura. And I also found that in her vulnerability was always such strength. Like she projected, though, it's so bare and raw, that video, you just felt this was a very strong woman as well, like immediately. So then, she becomes hugely famous. This song kicks everything off. And in a flash, everything changes again. And it's clear that she is not a typical pop star because at the height of her career, she does this.
We know we will win. We have confidence in the victory of good over evil. Fight the real enemy.
That was Sinead O'Connor singing an a cappella version of Bob Marley's War on Saturday Night Live in 1992. That performance ends, and you can kind of hear it with the ripping sounds with her tearing up a picture of Pope John Paul II to protest the Catholic Church's cover-up of sexual abuse. That was a pop culture moment to change pop culture. Maura, what do you remember about that moment?
I remember how angry people were at her, just furious. And the backlash was so severe and stunning, and it really revealed how conservative at its core, even people who, Madonna, right, who made her career transgressing against the Catholic Church in a lot of ways, but she even, kind of disdained what Sinead did. And I feel like it was very indicative of how women who tell truths don't get spat on and shunned. And I mean, it wound up that she was right, So
And you were raised in a Catholic home. What was the reaction inside your house?
Oh, I mean, well, I was also somebody who Madonna records had been banned from my house until I was about 15. So my mom was very not happy with that. And there was no banning because I was a teenager by then. And so banning was out the window. But, there was a lot of anger. And I mean, even when Pope John Paul II died, people, my family was still reckoning with his legacy. I wasn't, but members of my family were, because I feel like when you're in the Catholic Church, like it's such an all-encompassing institution, and to have it questioned means to have basically one of the main building blocks of your life questioned, and I think that also spoke to the anger that people reacted with. But again, she was like, history proved her not incorrect, right?
That's right. I was only 10 when that happened, but I do remember what stood out to me as a child was how much she was mocked and belittled and just made fun of. She was a joke. She was a pop culture joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Anakana, she was also booed at a benefit concert shortly after that performance, and celebrities like Frank Sinatra lashed out with threats of actual violence against this woman. What do you make of that backlash now, 30 years later?
Well, I think it's shameful. I mean, didn't Joe Pesci or Pesky, whatever his name is, stand up the next week and said he would have given her a big kick or something? It was so acceptable at that time to threaten violence against a woman. Whereas, like, if you think about that today, please God, I hope that, if some numpty stood up and said that, it would be challenged. But at that time, it was perfectly acceptable. The fact of the matter is Sinead was way ahead of her time. And she really should have been given a public apology, because she was utterly vindicated. She was ridiculed. And here we are, like 30 years or whatever later, and knowing what we know. And, did we ever acknowledge that? Absolutely not. Because, of course, it's totally acceptable to ridicule women,
We've, seen her also struggle so openly and publicly with her mental health, with her trauma and her pain, and never shy away from speaking about it in a way that is very rare for public figures, especially for pop stars. Niko, what was that like for you to watch, just to see her be so honest about this, especially after the loss of her youngest son, Shane?
I mean, it's nice for, like, I am as a person myself that, struggles with mental illness, and I try to talk about it in public when I can, and it appears in my writing and all that sort of stuff. It's striking to see someone that is so honest and so willing to be honest about their struggles and their triumphs, and to be real, and to be, Sinead was very funny. She was very charming. She was all of these things that she doesn't get enough flowers for. It was always really, whenever she would appear in the news, I always had to sort of prepare for the reaction and the backlash to her. And I think we see this a lot with people that struggle in public the way that she does, because she was a very honest and earnest person. And you see the way that people treat her and the way that people react to news about her. And you just sort of think, like, this is also the way you treat and react to people in your life, in the world around you. And, it sort of creates this broader stigma. And I always really appreciated that she never really tried to mask or hide or cover these things, because it would be so easy to do that in order to have a more successful career or whatever. You could hide the fact that you're diagnosed as being bipolar, or you could mask, suicide attempts, or you could hide away all these things. But she chose to let them sort of live in the light with her, for good or for ill. And I think that's a really important and really powerful thing. And I hope a thing that people take away from this is, how did they react to that, and how did they treat her with that news, and how are we processing that, and how are we doing that to people that we know?
Anakana, what's your response to that?
Well, last night I was looking at videos of the time when Sinead, there was a period where Sinead was in a motel and she was experiencing horrible agoraphobia, and she made a video and she put it on Facebook. And then she made a follow-up video, and in it she said that aside from the births of her children, and just want to acknowledge that Sinead was an extraordinarily loving mother who was devoted to her children, that week where the public had responded to her was one of the happiest times in her life. And it was so extraordinary, the way that she could respond to simple kindness. So she talked a lot about the people that owned the hotel. She talked a lot about the nurses that took care of the hospital. And I'd recommend that people actually go and look at that video, because I feel like that's the essence of Sinead right there. She's extremely funny. She's very self kind of, she's sending herself up. But all she is full of love. I feel like she almost had like 3 extra empathy genes compared to like an average person. And this morning I was trying to think about legacy, and I was thinking, well, if human beings do nothing for the rest of their time on Earth, if we could reckon with mental health, like if we could actually dedicate a serious amount of, research and creativity and understanding, I mean, that would be a worthwhile thing. I realize that's a bit of a tall order at 10:30 in the morning, but, I just think she was absolutely brilliant. She was so courageous. And I just thank God that I grew up with her as an influence.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. Thank you for remembering this person and shifting the way that we see her. Anakana, Niko, Maura, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, we want to go out with some music that maybe people are not as familiar with. Maura, you had suggested a song called James Brown from her 2018 album, I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss. Just briefly tell us what makes this song so special.
I think this is a really great little, it's very seductive. It has a sax solo from Sean Kuti, and I feel like it really encapsulates the kind of vibrancy that Sinead had throughout her career. It's very, like I said, seductive, but it's also kind of self-deprecating in a way, and it just has a really nice groove to it too. And I think it's a really great way to celebrate the many facets of her personality.
I love it. Well, let's take a listen to that song.
I know I may look a little square, I know I look like a wooden chair, but I got, yeah. And in the words of James Brown, I'm sorry but I came to get down, I'm sorry but I,
From 2018, that's Sinead O'Connor with a song called James Brown. Before that, you heard my conversation with music writers Niko Stratis and Maura Johnston, and Irish author Anakana Schofield. Her book, By Now, won the Irish Novel of the Year prize a few years back. Sinead O'Connor died yesterday. She was 56. For more on her life and music, go to CBC News. Well, that's it for Commotion today. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thank you so much for listening.